Welcome to The Grow Down on Soil Health, the podcast where we dig deep into sustainable farming practices that can enhance your land and your bottom line. I'm your host, Dr. Ben West, Executive Director of Farmers for Soil Health, a program dedicated to improving soil health practices like planting cover crops. Today we're taking a closer look at how soil health practices impact the water cycle and what that can mean for the future of agriculture and beyond. We'll discuss how farmer-to-farmer discussions boost credibility, boost the rate of adoption, and overall soil health and water quality. Today, we're joined by NRCS Minnesota State Conservationist Troy Daniell. Troy, really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, Ben, thanks for having me on, and look forward to the conversation. You're going to be talking about things that are near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and really appreciate you, Troy, and people like you have dedicated their career to help in advance these practices and advance soil health. And you've been doing that with NRCS for quite a while, and you've been the Minnesota State Conservationist for about 7 years, but you don't sound like you're from Minnesota.
I am
give
not.
us a little background on, How'd you get there? What's your background? How'd you get into this?
Yeah, so if you don't pick up on it, I can't shake my southern roots. I grew up in Texas, North Texas, kind of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm a seventh generation producer in the U.S. We were in Texas. Our family's been there 6 generations. But, cattle, cotton, wheat, those type of things. Most of my life, our family transitioned because of the land and some of the challenges, even post-Dust Bowl. We transitioned mostly to hay and cattle, and soil health isn't new to me. I mean, my grandfather was doing things when it wasn't cool. It wasn't always the topic of the day. Yeah. He wasn't exactly an early adopter, but he was definitely thinking about those things and how to not just improve the soil, but build it back from where it had gone over the decades of our family farming the same place. So.
Yeah, and so you say he didn't, it's not, it took him a little while to come around, but, people ask me all the time, is this whole sustainability movement in agriculture a fad? And I say, I don't think so. Farmers have been serious about sustainability since at least the Dust Bowl. Sometimes they're skeptical of new buzzwords. Sometimes they're skeptical of buzzwords like sustainability. But it doesn't take them long, typically. I mean, how long have we been talking about soil health now, Troy? 15 years? I think probably I first started. Yeah, 15 or 20 years. And it's a common topic in every farmer conversation I'm in now. Farmers are getting really serious about soil health. Yeah, and you've done it all over the country, but not just in the U.S. You've done a lot of work outside of the U.S. Tell us about some of your international work.
Yeah, not necessarily a lot of work outside the U.S., but when I worked in Texas, of course, we had some agreements that we worked with the Mexican government. Basically, they're our counterparts over there on the Department of Ag, on some collaborative efforts around the Rio Grande and others, and it's all around water, But even early on, like you say, 15, 20 years ago, you realize water and the overlay of water and soil, you can't disconnect those. So, water quality, water quantity, those are big issues down in South Texas and along the Rio Grande Valley, and a lot of irrigation, things of that nature. So we collaborated, I'd say, with our neighbors to the south to improve how the Rio Grande's used and the water quality, because it impacts so many people. And done a little bit of that since I've been in Minnesota. We work with our partners at the Red River Commission, with North Dakota and Manitoba, on all things related to the Red River watershed. It's the Red River of the North, so it goes north, and it's kind of hard to understand that, but everything we do on the U.S. side directly impacts things in Lake Winnipeg. So water quality, water quantity, water retention.
So, Troy, you talked about, working down in Mexico, your interest in water. And that's one of the things I want to talk to you today. I know that's something that's really important to you. It's something you focused a lot on in your work in Minnesota. And it's something that's really important to me, as I think about these soil health practices that we're helping farmers implement. They have so many, robust, well-known benefits to the environment. And right now, the kind of the buzzword is carbon, and I understand that on one hand, but on the other hand, I was distracted from many of the benefits that things like cover crops and no-till and other practices give us. And water is one of the big ones. It's
Yeah.
personal to me. I live in West Tennessee. We sit on top of the Memphis Sands Aquifer, one of the cleanest, healthiest, and most abundant aquifers in the country. I think it's number 2 in the country in terms of size, and it's still in really good health. But as I look around the country, if we're not really careful, it won't be in good health very long, because you don't have to look very far to see water resources, whether that's groundwater or surface water, really impaired.
Yes.
And soil health practices have so much to offer. And that talk a little
Right.
bit about water quality, water quantity, and how you've seen soil health practices come to play in the water conservation world.
I'll do my best to get this into a short statement or two, because it is a big topic. It's near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Dust Bowl country. The majority of my family are in Oklahoma and Texas, and water's always been an issue, just like soil. It makes me go back then to working at Texas A&M Research Station in Stephenville, where we were doing carbon studies back then on switchgrass. But I worked over on the water side a little bit, so we were measuring evapotranspiration rates, things like that. Even hemp, we did studies on hemp. But I remember Dr. Matt Sanders, who later retired at ARS up in North Dakota. He said, "I know this was 30 years ago. We're obsessing over carbon and leaf area index. We need to be working on water." That really hit me hard when I became a district conservationist out in the panhandle of Oklahoma. We would see these huge thunderstorms build up in the summertime right over the most heavily irrigated cropland. Those farmers didn't intend for that to happen. That's just a reality. But there was just enough evapotranspiration going up into the air. It was creating weather events. Guess what that does? It moves east, dumps water just to the east on watershed, so it spikes the watershed. So, and this whole static about climate and weather events, I think the general public has missed the boat a little bit, and I think we're starting to shift back and linking the soil and the management of the soil and what we do on the ground to the water cycle, and hopefully try to keep that water cycle close to home. Watershed management 101. You want to keep as much water within its realm as possible so it doesn't impact others and neighbors and things like that. Keep that water cycle close to the ground is the way I've always thought of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the big selling points for cover crops with farmers is better water infiltration. It can help their fields be more resilient during times of drought. And that's obviously a great outcome for farmers. But the potential implications are even much bigger than that, with things like groundwater recharge and water quality. What are some of the big challenges in water conservation you've seen in your career, and how do some of these practices like cover crops and no-till come into play?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, you've probably heard, I know you have, the 4 R's when you're talking nutrient management. Well, it's the same thing for water. It's right place, right timing, right amounts, things like that. And that's what farmers and ranchers have to think about when they're managing the water that either comes across their land, is under their ground, comes from the sky, and link that with what they're doing on the ground, with the soil health management. It really ties in well the systems approach. In 30 years or so of working in conservation and agriculture, we talk about systems approach and then we back off, and then we talk about it and we back off. And the secretary just announced, last week, this regenerative ag effort. And our part of it within NRCS is going back to that systems approach, where we don't want you to just dabble in cover crop. We want you to look at it as part of your whole system. Look at your tillage, look at how you use cover crop, what cover crops are right, and then how does that link with your water management? In the Midwest, drainage water management is just as big a deal as irrigation. And again, it's how do you keep the right amount of water, be highly productive, not be detrimental to your operation, but also not be detrimental to your neighbors. Doing it as a system is going to be critical. So I think there's going to be a high need for a lot of technical expertise, technical assistance, technology to help farmers do this and do it holistically, so that they can be more economically viable and hopefully keep farming generations to come.
Yeah, and obviously is that there's a lot of different opinions about what's happening with the climate, but one thing that seems that there's pretty strong consensus on is weather patterns are changing, weather events are getting more extreme. We're having more frequent heavy rainfall events and more frequent drought events. And how do you see cover crops helping farmers manage that reality of, they're probably going to be facing a future where it rains at times more and at times less than it has in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. That cover crops are a tool in the toolbox to help manage that. We know anecdotally there's not a ton of long-term research on for example, this variety of rye versus this variety of clover and how it impacts water retention capability within the soil profile, or getting that soil or water down into the aquifer. There is research, but there's just not a ton of it. So a lot of this is farmers having to learn on the go and dabble a little bit on what works on their property, but at the end of the day, they've got to be able to utilize that cover crop as a complementary tool to help them be more drought resilient by retaining water into that water profile, soil profile, but also not overutilizing water. That's a big deal. But we've seen it here in Minnesota. We've had, since I've been here, a couple of years of really major flash flooding, large flooding. Where there is good cover on the ground, the benefits are off the chart. You don't see soil movement. You see the soil dry up quicker because the water goes down into the profile like it's supposed to do. So you don't see, you can look at farmers here that are doing soil health practices and compare to their neighbors and see a difference of how much water is actually coming out those inlet structures on their drainage water system. So long term, I think producers are going to get more dialed into that. How does cover crop and tillage complement my drainage water management, my irrigation water management, and how those work as a system together to get the biggest bang for your effort on the soil?
Yeah, and obviously the USDA is doubling down on this. You mentioned Secretary Rollins yesterday, or a couple of days ago, announced a new regenerative agriculture focus and effort within USDA. I know it's brand new, but what can you share with us about that?
I think the big things we do know is those practices that are tried and true. That we've got lots of long-term research. We've got good examples like cover crop, like minimal tillage, reduced tillage, tilling the right amount at the right time for each location, nutrient management, things like that. I think it all ties in well with the current president's objective to make America healthy again. We know that a healthier soil produces a higher quality product, whether that's a beef product or a corn product or whatever the case may be. You can increase nutrient density with healthier soil, reduces the need for fertility, and improve the timing of fertility. So all that impacts water quality. So I don't see a losing side to the regenerative ag movement. And like I said, that's the word of the day. It's still those tried and true practices of managing the nutrients, managing the pesticide, reducing how much we have to pump into the system to get the output we desire. All that ties together. So, and again, it comes back to water and soil.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we keep digging in, let's talk about Farmers for Soil Health. This is a program established by farmers for farmers and focuses on strengthening soil health practices such as planting cover crops to enhance the environment and profitability of farmers. Through this podcast, which is in partnership with the Soy Checkoff, Pork Checkoff, and the National Corn Growers Association, we dig deep into sustainable farming practices. We're bringing you tangible, experience-based, and research-backed information that can help you enhance your land and your bottom line. If you're enjoying it thus far, check out our other episodes. Several have already posted, and many more will be coming into the future. So, Troy, you've been working for NRCS for over 30 years, around 30 years.
Almost 30.
Almost 30. You spent your career working with farmers and helping farmers adopt a whole suite of conservation sustainability practices. What have you learned in that time? What does it take to get a farmer to try a new practice or practices that clearly would be beneficial to them in their operation, but it's a new practice to them and maybe they're hesitant because there's some risk there or some lack of knowledge? What's it take to get that guy or gal to take the first step?
Yeah. There's a lot of social studies that are out there on what drives change in a person. And it's all pretty solid from just personal experience. I've visualized, I've seen it. So a person like me back in the day when I worked in the field, I might go out to a farm and talk to them about a gully they've got. But at the same time, I might want to put a bug in their ear about their tillage practices, maybe trying a little cover crop, maybe dialing in their nutrient management a little better. What I've discovered, it may be different from others, is if you can complement, I'll just say sales pitch from a local conservationist or an agronomist at the co-op, if you can complement that sales pitch with lots of other information, now you've got Google and you've got things on the internet. Used to it came in Farm Journal and publications such as that, and still does. So it takes a broad approach, I think, to drive change, not just for farming, but everything else. If you start seeing your neighbors be successful in changing their system and what they've adopted, and you build, you have trusted advisors. I always get frustrated, Ben, when I go to places and they talk about the trusted advisor.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I don't have just one trusted advisor. And the advisors adjust a little bit. So they're going to change depending on the topic. I love my pastor, but I'm not going to ask him about soil health. Now, he likes to talk about killing buckbrush and buckthorn on his property, but we're not going to talk a lot about soil health because he's worried about brush. But I think it's imperative more than ever that farmers, ranchers have a complementary group of people that they are working with, which includes some mentorships. Here in Minnesota, we have a really strong soil health coalition. It's got well over 1,000 members, and these are mentors mentoring other farmers in small groups. I don't know if you might want to call them disciples or whatever they call them, but it's where they can talk through things. And so they're not just talking to the co-op agronomists. They're not just talking to the guy at NRCS or the gal at NRCS. They're talking to their neighbors. So they can take all the research and data that's coming at them from every direction, talk that through with another farmer, another rancher, friends, family, and those technical experts. And I think that's what helps people move more confidently into a new system. because it's change, and change is hard and risky. I mean, it's risk. And I think a lot of times in the conservation world, and especially bureaucrats, we often forget about that farmer is taking a big risk when they make change. And we don't want to lead them down a path that leads to an economic problem. We want them to be economically more resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. Farming looks easy until you've done it, right?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
but every decision farmers make every day potentially introduces risk into their operation, and
Yes.
particularly right now, we're at a time where farmers, they don't need a lot more risk right now because there's plenty built into the marketplace. But Troy, I
Right.
love what you said about relationships, and I was actually working with a group of fairly young professionals in NRCS in the Tennessee office, and we were talking about relationships, and we had a really interesting conversation. We live in the information age. There's information. If you're interested in cover crops and you're a farmer, there's plenty of information out there. There's information everywhere. But as a matter of fact, as you said, it's coming at you from everywhere. And we talked about the fact that, relationships may be more important today than they ever have been because farmers do have so much information. The role of trusted advisors, people that they know and trust and can help them think through potential options, seems like it could be even more important than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, just the way society is, we have to work at that. And so things like these coalitions, I think, are a good mechanism that really work at tying people together. It's just changed so much. There's fewer farmers than ever on a broader landscape. So your neighbors are not necessarily your neighbors. I grew up where you had a neighbor every section of land, basically. People were living on sections of land or two sections of land. Well, now it's not that way. They may be on halfway around the county, but you can learn from each other. So partnerships, collaboration, things of that nature are very imperative. And to help weed through the chaos of data, I've got friends over at Farm Journal and Trust in Food, Trust in Beef, and we've talked about those issues of we have so much good data, but it's only as good as how you use it, right?
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, you can take all that data and you have to say, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my spot on this earth and how I want to provide for my family or whatever the case may be, make myself a good, viable business? So those relationships are key. Trust is key. And trust takes a while. I mean, trust isn't instant, or at least it isn't for me. It takes time to build that trust. But that's what keeps you from mitigating the risk, to figure out what system works best for you, because there's no cookie cutter approach that's going to be successful. So I think having these farmer to farmer mentor programs, I know they're popped up all over the country here in Minnesota, but we have a strong grazing coalition, we have a strong soil health coalition, and we have our folks at Sustainable Farming that have been doing this for decades. Having those mentors and link those with those practitioners from NRCS or the co-op agronomist, all that linked together, that's typically, and it might be your pastor, I don't know, but it's all these people that are your trusted advisors,
Yeah, absolutely. The technology now gives people more information, but it doesn't necessarily give them more wisdom or discernment. And,
Correct.
I agree with you completely. These relationships, coalitions where people can learn from each other in ways that they can actually manage and understand, I think is going to be critical to helping farmers adopt these practices long term. As the world gets more complex, in some ways, what we have to do on the ground has to get more simple. And that is farmers,
Absolutely.
neighbors learning from other neighbors and figuring out what works on their farm day by day and year by year.
Right. Yeah, because we want them to be in a situation where the market is their number one risk and having to navigate. I've never met to this day a farmer that says, "Hey, I just want some kind of a payment." No, they want to be a successful business. And, whether you're running a Dairy Queen or a gas station or whatever business, you want to narrow your risk down to the things you can't control. And then you're going to dial in your trusted advisors, and you're going to try and make that business successful. And otherwise, soil health is not going to have a lot of meaning unless they can be economically successful at it.
Absolutely. So Troy, obviously there's a lot of benefits to farmers when they start to implement some of these practices, just directly to their farm operation. More resilient farming operations, in some cases, better water infiltration, better weed suppression. I mean, a whole host of benefits. But I think all of us believe that long term, for this adoption to really be accelerated, to get farmers right now, there's less than 10% of farmers, for example, around the country use cover crops. We'd love to get that up 70, 80% long term. Probably to get there, there's going to have to be some economic incentives as well. And right now, there's just a ton of talk in the industry around economic incentives for carbon, for example. That's the buzzword because so much focus on climate. But man, it's so complex. I mean, looking at some of as a scientist, looking at some of the approaches that we're taking to try and measure carbon, it's just a really complex system and idea. But there might be other environmental benefits that are both easier to measure, easier to manage, and just as important. And we talked about water. Talk about your thoughts about that. How do you see the economic system developing to help farmers adopt some of these practices?
Yeah, it's I don't care if people steal my ideas necessarily because I work for the government, but and I care. But the reality is, we don't. Most producers, and I'm still a producer myself. We don't want a handout. We want true economic benefits to everything we do, whatever that is on the ground. You can measure water really, really well, really dialed in. So imagine the ability to get some type of economic incentive through the public and private sector. Maybe it's a municipality. Maybe it's a large company that benefits from the management of water within a watershed. What if they incentivize ecosystem services, might be the way you put this, but incentivize how much water you retain on your property during certain times of the year through drainage water management, how much they incentivize better use of irrigation water so that the aquifer can replenish or not be depleted as fast. It provides local social benefits to everyone, economic benefits. So I don't know. I am not, I'm not Steve Jobs. I'm not going to create a company necessarily that's going to solve all these problems, but I know there's a lot of smart people thinking about this. We just have to open our hearts and our minds to the new way of doing business. I mean, who would have ever thought we would have these cryptocurrencies? But it's still around, right? But something that seems a little more pragmatic would, how do we pay for farmers to manage gallons of water? How do we pay for reduce nitrates in the profile of the water system, reduce phosphorus going into the water, and not be totally reliant on all taxpayer programs, but be market driven? I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think that's where we need to be, is finding more markets for those farmers to not just sell their beans through a contract, but sell all those other services that they're providing on the ground. Building organic soil in the soil profile, retaining the water. All those are things, wildlife benefits, numbers of prairie chickens. That's a real thing, and it's measurable. It's a real measurable product. So I think that's where conservation can be and should be moving. And there's always a lot of discussion about that when I go to a few of these meetings, conferences on soil health and sustainability is how do we build that? And you're right at the beginning. I think there's been an obsession maybe on carbon, which is a little harder to measure. There are so many things that we can measure really easy, and we just got to put some kind of economic viability to it.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the features of Farmers for Soil Health, one of the things we're working on, is a sustainability marketplace where farmers who adopt practices that produce environmental benefits can then trade in a virtual environment with buyers, with food companies, biofuel companies, any corporation or company that wants some of these benefits. One of the challenges we have right now in the environmental services market is there's no transparency about what different outcomes are worth. People ask, what's a ton of carbon worth? Well, we don't really know. So we hope to be able to bring transparency and openness to that marketplace and reduce uncertainty, because one of the things that is for sure is uncertainty is bad for everybody. It's bad for farmers. It's bad for food companies and everybody in the middle. So bringing transparency and openness to the marketplace, we think, is one really important step in getting to exactly what you were saying, a market-based system where farmers get paid for adopting practices that benefit all of society.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I got 2 points on that, if you'll bear with me. So I told my staff years ago when I first came to Minnesota, and it's something I had said in my previous roles in Texas as a program manager, I can envision a day, and it's getting there, where a local conservation agronomist or a local soil conservationist not only sells the benefits of practices like we normally do, you're going to save on soil loss, you're going to save on that, but opens up a portfolio of economic opportunities, just like an Edward D. Jones got, and says, here's a portfolio of possible benefits if you go into this system. And it needs to be clear. It needs to be clear for both sides, not just the farmer, but everyone else that's buying into this. The Snicker bar, I mean, my mom loves Snicker bars. We know what's in a Snicker bar. You can read on the label. Yep. And I'm willing to pay for her X number of dollars for that Snicker bar. Basic economics. And I think if we can find clear values that there's total clarity, total transparency, that builds trust. And I think that will help move the needle for soil health and resiliency and this whole regenerative ag movement quicker than any government program ever has.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, Troy, as we're coming to the end of the podcast here, I just want to say how much I appreciate you joining. I got into conservation for 2 reasons. First, I was just attracted to conservation. I grew up in the outdoors. Conserving nature and our natural resources was really important to me. But then I met people working in conservation, and what I learned is the culture of the conservation community is different than a lot, because people in our community, it's not just a job, it's a passion, and it's a professional passion. But for many of us, it's also a personal passion. Like most people in conservation spend their free time outdoors, and we're coming into as we're taping this episode, we're coming into the holiday season and into winter. You were sharing with me ahead of time that you're looking forward to getting out on the ice and doing a little fishing this coming winter. I'm a fisherman. I love to fish, but I've never ice fished, and it's been on my bucket list. If I ever come up, Troy, to see you in Minnesota and go ice fishing, what should I be prepared for?
Layers. As a Southern man, you need to learn to wear the layers. Yeah. But yeah, the biggest preparation is have good gear, embrace the cold. And maybe if you're going to try it for the first time, go with somebody you know and trust, and they've got a good heater in their tent, but yeah, it's fun. It takes more patience to me than it does fishing out of a boat, because I can move my boat. I do the 20-minute rule. If I don't land something good, I move. Ice fishing's not quite that way, so you have to have a little more patience. Fish move slower, but yeah, you're right. The outdoors is a good reason to be in conservation.
Yeah, well, I am an outdoors person. I spend as much time outdoors as I can. I learned several years ago that if you only go outside when the weather's nice, then you don't go outside very much. So, I'm someone who's adopted the idea that there's no such thing as bad weather, just inappropriate clothing. So
there you go.
yeah, well, I'd love to get up there with you sometime. Yeah, love to get up there with you sometime. So, Troy, we've talked a lot today about cover crops and other sustainability practices. We've talked about how important these practices are for our entire ecosystem, but particularly water, and talked a lot about the role of personal relationships and trust in helping farmers better understand and see the opportunities for some of these practices on their farm. And it's people like you on the front lines, the cutting edge of interacting with farmers that are making this happen. So just really appreciate you and the work that you do, and appreciate you joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I appreciate being on it, and always love to talk about good conservation, pragmatic soil health practices, and the success of the American farmer.
Absolutely. And so thank you, Troy, and for all of you listening, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Grow Down on Soil Health. If this conversation felt like your kind of thing, make sure to rate our podcast, follow us on social media, and check out our website, farmersforsoilhealth.com. Stay tuned here for more insights on sustainable farming practices. Until next time.